Hello and welcome to Creepy Canvas, where the rain outside mirrors the shivers within. Tonight, as the raindrops dance on the window, we unravel true scary stories that will send chills down your spine. From the shadows of the internet to the echoes of haunted tales, our canvas captures the essence of the eerie. So, as the rain weaves its haunting melody, join me in this journey through the unknown. Subscribe to Creepy Canvas and let the rain outside be the soundtrack to the nightmares within. Viewers' discretion is advised. Now let the stories begin. Story 1. Listen to your gut. I always parked in a certain spot at my last job for 12 years that I was there. It was accessible to the public as it wasn't company parking, but they wanted us to park in the back of the lot, so the closer spots could be available for customers. One day, my spot's taken by a dark-tinted caddy, and I'm immediately pissed because everyone knows it's mine. It's morning shift, so 4 a.m., so it can't be one of the others because I know what they drive. So newbie? Or maybe another employee from another shop in the plaza. It's still there on my lunch break, and when I go home, and the next day I come in at 1 p.m. till close, around 9:30, and then also the next. Something about it really bothered me. It smelled wrong. Literally, it's the south and high summer, and who knows what's baking in there. My dad was a Marine, then a police officer. He always said if you feel something is wrong, there probably is. So I dialed the non-emergency contact police number. I felt like an idiot, but every time I walked by it bugged me. So, I was stuck waiting for over an hour before anyone shows, and honestly, if I hadn't been off the next day, would have been like F it. But I waited, mostly because I can be really a petty SOB, and that's my spot, damn it. The police show, all annoyed because who knows how many "they can't park here" calls they get. They run the license plate though, and then things go crazy. They want my info, want me to contact my manager. Does this lot have cameras? Have I touched the car? Etc. Apparently the car is on Amber Alert as the last sighting of a missing person who was a minor, a 15-year-old girl. When they pop the trunk, they find her dead, mutilated body under a blanket and the source of the smell. She had gone out with her much older, controlling, and insecure boyfriend, but had decided to get out of the relationship. She only made the mistake of getting into the car with him. He drove 3 counties over after torturing her, stuffing her in there and who knows what else, then parked it and walked away, left her to die in the trunk. I never learned her time of death, so it haunts me sometimes thinking she might have been saved if I'd made a fuss earlier. So yeah, listen to your gut even if it seems petty. Story 2. The Troubles. Early to mid-90s in Northern Ireland. I was a kid of around 8 or 9. The sun was shining, and it was sometime in the early afternoon. My dad needed to return a library book in the Crumlin Road, a Protestant loyalist area in Belfast. We were Catholics, and the Crumlin Road was notoriously dangerous at the time. Still is to a lesser extent. So I was already a little on edge, just knowing the reputation of the place. My dad was cool though. Didn't seem worried or anything. It's not like we have Catholic printed on our foreheads. He did say, however, that I had to pretend to have a different name if anyone asked me. My name is one which marks you as a Catholic, so I adopted a Protestant name for the trip. We came to a road which led to an intersection, across which was a predominantly Catholic Republican enclave called the Ardoyne Road. We were headed to the right, down a long winding path, but further up the road ahead, towards the intersection, we could see a group of men. One of them was running back and forth across the road, relaying information between 2 pockets of people. Some were staring across the road towards the Catholic area. Some were talking to a man in a parked but running car. One in particular stuck out. He had long hair and a leather jacket and was very tall, at least compared to the other men. It all looked suspicious, even to me as a child, although I didn't know why, but my dad's demeanor changed to a more serious and quiet one, and I took it as confirmation that we weren't safe. He was from Belfast. We were living in a town outside of Belfast at the time, and grew up when things were at their worst here, so he knew the ropes and knew the signs that something was happening. We weren't walking towards the men, so it wasn't a problem. We crossed to the right and started walking away. This is when a woman approached us. She was middle-aged with short red hair. She saw us coming and made a purposeful beeline towards us. She seemed preoccupied, nervous. She started grilling my dad immediately, asking who he was and where he was coming from. She was talking in a, "I'm trying my best to sound casual, but I'm failing" manner. I could feel my entire body beginning to boil with fear, and I felt as though I was mere moments away from being discovered. It was like a horror movie where someone finds themselves in a small town where everyone is in a cult or something, and they're trying to blend in, but are drawing suspicion and are losing themselves in an ever-increasing paranoia. I suddenly had visions of my dad getting shot and me screaming over his corpse, maybe even getting shot myself despite being a child. The longer my dad and the woman talked, the more I was starting to lose the ability to hear, as though my head was underwater. I was holding my dad's hand, and I was struggling to keep a grip because of the sweat pumping out of my palm. I didn't know how or why, but something primal in me recognized that we were in serious danger. It was clear that she was a part of whatever was going on around the corner and was trying to manage and analyze the flow of foot traffic, especially that of strangers like us. Given that she and us were the only people on the street, she had been doing a good job. She was fishing hard for information about us. My dad played it cool and responded to her questions without really revealing much, doing a much better job of being casual than she was. The area we were from, he explained, was mixed, Protestant and Catholic, and he feigned displeasure at that fact, trying to signal that he hated Catholics and was somewhat miffed to have to live amongst them, without ever actually using those words. It was subtle, and I was terrified that I might need to participate in the conversation because there's no way I could dance around the truth as well as my dad was doing. He explained that he was just here to return a book, which he showed her as proof. She asked about me, my name, and I gave her the fake name. She surely read the terror in my face and could hear it in my voice. My dad decided that that was the time to break off and say, "Nice to meet you, all the best," and started walking away with me. I could sense that the woman didn't budge and just stood and stared at us as we walked away. I glanced over my shoulder after about 30 seconds and just caught a glimpse of her turning and walking towards the road where the men were gathered. We rounded a corner and were now at the top of a very long and steep road path with the library at the very bottom of it. The path was fenced on one side, and on the other side was a row of houses. It felt like we were walking deeper into danger and that we had only two routes of escape: keep going or turn back the way we came. About partway down the road, we realized we were being followed. My dad told me to run ahead and check that the library was opened, and I hesitated. He said it was okay and to just go and check. I glanced over my shoulder. It was the man in the leather jacket with the long hair. I did what my dad wanted and ran ahead, heart pounding and ears pricked, awaiting the crack of gunfire. I checked the door was opened, and I ran back up. As I was coming back, I saw that the man in the leather jacket had turned and was making his way back up the road. My dad looked unfazed but was walking with a certain rigidity, like something had happened in the time it took me to run to the library and back again, and he hadn't quite unclenched his fists yet. He said it was okay and we were safe. I asked about the man following us. He said he sent me ahead, and when I was a safe distance away, he stopped and turned around to face him, ready for whatever happened. He said he was expecting violence, but as he turned around, the leather jacket dude immediately put his head down, turned, and walked back the way he came. My dad watched him for a few seconds, and then started making his way back towards me. That afternoon, within the hour we were there, a Catholic taxi driver was murdered in that street. The vibes that something terrible was going to happen were justified, and I've never felt as terrified as I did that day. When the news about the taxi driver was on TV that night, I knew I had seen the planning of a murder, and I knew we had walked into the middle of it. I could probably have identified both the woman and the leather jacket man had I been asked about them by the police, but that was never going to happen. No way my dad would have volunteered himself, and therefore me, to the cops to be a witness against a terrorist cell. Story 3. Abducted. When I was younger, I was abducted and abused by a couple that offered me a ride home from school. I had posted my story about a year ago on the SA counseling subreddit, and recently posted my story again on a police subreddit asking for advice about filing a police report. But they basically told me it wouldn't accomplish anything, and that there is zero chance this will get solved since it was years ago. And I don't know the identity of my abusers or the exact location where it occurred. Here's what I wrote. Years ago, I was walking home from school when a car pulled up next to me and the people in it asked me if I'd like a ride home. They were a couple, and since it was a man and woman and they seemed friendly, I felt safe getting into the car with them. When I got in the car, their demeanor changed and they told me they had to go to their house really quick to pick something up first. They were whispering to each other during the ride and I couldn't make out what they said. When we arrived at the house, they told me to go into the house with them. At this point, I knew something wasn't right, but I was afraid to say no, so I did what they said. Once we got into the house, the woman grabbed me and pushed me to the floor. She started to hold me down, so I was kicking, yelling, and struggling, and this made the woman even madder, so she punched me in the face and told me she was going to tie rope around me if I continued to struggle. She then tells me I have to take my clothes off, and at this point I'm on the verge of crying and begging her to please let me go. She tells me to stop acting like a crybaby and just do it. The guy then joins her in holding me down, and they both start taking my clothes off since I'm still crying and begging them to let me go. When I'm naked, the guy takes off his clothes and the woman is telling me to keep my eyes shut or she'll hit me. The guy then rapes me from behind. After several minutes of this, I feel something sharp inserted into my behind and I start to scream in pain. I open my eyes, but the woman holds my head down and threatens me again to keep my eyes closed, so I close them again. The guy finishes abusing me, and when he's done, I'm just lying on the floor and not saying or reacting to anything, while the guy puts his clothes back on and talks to the woman. They tell me to get my clothes back on, so I start to do as I'm told. When I've finished with putting my clothes back on, they tell me to get back in the car. As we are walking to leave the house, the woman starts laughing. Once we are in the car, they don't say anything else to me. After several minutes of driving, they let me off by the main road. They told me to get out, and after that, they drove off. They didn't even threaten me not to say anything. They just told me to get out of the car. I then wandered off to a wooded area nearby. I remember how unbearable the pain was, both physically and emotionally. I felt like I wanted to break down and cry and scream at the top of my lungs, but I couldn't. I was so overwhelmed I couldn't cry at first, but after several minutes I finally broke down and cried. What made me cry was not only what happened, but the realization that I had nobody I could turn to. My family was abusive, and at home I was abused both physically and mentally. I knew they would blame me for getting into the car with them, so I had to keep this to myself. I had no friends at school and basically no family. Nobody would ever comfort me or help me. I was all alone. I'm still afraid of telling people in real life because I feel I'll be viewed as damaged or looked down on for being a male victim. I don't know what to do about finding out if they were ever caught or if they have other victims. I know too much time has passed, but I'm still hoping something can be done. I actually lived near the border of my state when this happened, so I thought maybe a federal law enforcement agency would take a report since there's a chance they crossed state lines to commit the assault. But like I said, I just don't know. Story 4. The Man in the Window. I've written about this on Reddit before, but when I was about 8, I was deep in the woods at my uncle's house. The parents went out and the 5 kids, 414, stayed home. We were playing a hide-and-seek game in the house with no lights on. There weren't street lights or anything, so you couldn't see anything at all. Base was in the living room, and I hid in the living room so I could quickly get to Base. My brother, 11, was it. He was doing his countdown, and I was hiding just a couple of feet from him when a lightning strike drew our attention to the window. We were both shocked to see the outline of a man at the window, trying to see in. We started whispering, and on the next lightning strike, the guy was starting to walk to the front door. My brother, Ben, quickly ran to lock the front door. I know, but it was a different time and place, and got there right before the guy started shaking the handle. Ben started flipping on the lights, presumably so the guy would know people were home and he'd leave, and he yelled for me to lock the other doors. I ran and locked the kitchen door, and then to the sliding glass door at the back of the house. As I was locking that door, the guy was suddenly there, standing there on the other side of the glass. I was frozen, but Ben calmly told me to close the curtain, and I focused on his voice and did what he said. My uncle has guns, but his son was gone on a hunting trip, so all we could find was a BB gun that looked like a real rifle. Ben stepped out on the porch with it to try to make the guy believe we were armed. They constantly had phone issues. This is going way back, but they had a party line, and we couldn't get the phone to work to make a call. We were trying to call someone on my uncle's CB radio, but weren't getting anyone. Eventually, an older cousin, who was only like 15 himself, showed up, and we thought an adult was there and we had been saved. That calmed us down and we went back to normal, I guess. I'm not sure I've ever had a creepier moment than looking up at window and seeing someone on the other side, though. Story 5. The Neighbor. My high school GF called late one night after I was home and in bed. She said that something had happened and asked if I could come over. She was clearly shaken and not full of details, so I told my parents and drove over towards her house. At the top of her subdivision, I was met by a cop with lights on. He asked where I was going, and I told him about the call from my GF. He lets me go by, and I come over the hill to the cul-de-sac where she lives, and I see multiple cop cars around the circle. They watch me pull up and get out of my car. My GF comes running out of her house and meets me in the street. She explains that someone had broken into her neighbor's house and started beating her with something heavy. The neighbor managed to get out of the house and headed to my GF's house, where she started banging furiously on the front door. My GF's dad was out of town, so her mom answered the door, and the neighbor just fell into the foyer, bleeding profusely from the head. Her mom looks up to see the attacker headed up the walkway towards the front door. She pulls the neighbor into the house and closes the door, hitting the attacker with it before it fully closed. He then took the heavy tool he had used to beat the neighbor and smashed the little window at the top of the door. Her mom started screaming, and the attacker just turned around and walked up the street into the darkness. I spent the night there that night, along with 2 or 3 cops outside in their cars, and in the morning we could see blood still pooled on the floor in the foyer, and splattered blood above the front door from where the attacker had swung the bloody tool to smash the window. No one was ever caught or even identified. It was just completely random. The neighbor survived, and to my knowledge had no permanent physical injuries beyond scarring from having her scalp stapled shut. She moved away shortly after the incident. Story 6. If you ever feel sleepy, just lock the door. I work midnight shift at a gas station, and I have for quite a while at various stations in different areas, with varying levels of criminal activity. I have regulars, of course. I'm a small-statured woman, as is my partner the other half of the week, and we've always been partners. So these regulars often worry about us and keep watch on creepy occurrences when they can. I had one man who worked in the metro an hour away who would stop in every morning for his cigarettes. He never smiled or seemed friendly, and as I often do, I tried to think of what I could do that might make him smile one day. It took many months, but I finally pulled it off by having his cigarettes ready on the counter and already scanned for him to pay for as he walked in. He smiled and then asked me, "Do you ever get scared on the night shift? You small girl is not safe." I said I sometimes did, but we could lock the doors and hide if we had to, and that the provincial police, think state troopers if you're American, had a station close by and came in often to get their highway vehicles washed. I had a good rapport with those police. He nodded and then told me a story about when he first moved to our country from Eastern Europe with his wife and child back in the late 80s, early 90s. He fell asleep at work one night at the gas station he worked midnights at. When he woke up, the phone had been ringing for hours, and his manager was shaking him violently, asking if he was all right. He was fine, he said. What was the problem? He was sorry he fell asleep. His manager screamed that it was fine he fell asleep to look outside. All of their motor oil was missing, and the outside of the place was a mess. The thieves had come and swiped all the oil and left him be because he slept through the entire thing, and then moved down the road to the next station for an encore. At that station, the clerk was awake and fought back, so the thieves stabbed him to death and left him to bleed out. When he finished telling me this, he concluded with, "If you ever feel sleepy, just lock the door and do it. It might save your life." I don't work at that station anymore, but I think about that guy all the time and wonder how his grandkids are. Story 7. The Baton Rouge Killer. My college girlfriend called me one night. The Baton Rouge serial killer had been active a while, and she was being followed, all over town and even after going in circles, by a white truck which the killer supposedly drove. She fit the victim profile. She was brunette living in, house sitting for her aunt, a wealthy neighborhood. My roommate and I drove over and we filed in line behind her in the truck. She lived essentially on the LSU grounds, so I assumed it was a stupid student prank or something. She parks at her aunt's house, truck stops one house short of her aunt's, and we pull in behind her. I explain I'm going to go defuse the situation. Walk over to the truck. The FBI says the killer is a white guy. This man is African American. Explain no one is upset, but he's freaking out my girlfriend. He needs to leave. He looks side-eyed at me and drives off. I see the guy again a few months later on the cover of the Baton Rouge paper. He's been arrested. He was the killer. Story 8. The Door. Up to this day, I'm still looking for a logical explanation to this. This happened in 2003. So I and an ex were checked in a coastal resort where the cottages were far apart, like 200 miles away. Around 11:30 p.m., while we're both drinking beer with the lights turned off and only the TV on, the doorknob suddenly rattled violently, like someone was forcibly trying to get it open. There was no double lock on the door, so my first reaction was to jump from the bed and block the door with my weight. The force of my landing must have been heard from the other side, but the twisting of the doorknob continued. By this time, I was already pressing my face to the floor, trying to estimate how many people were outside the door via the small gap between the floor and the bottom of the door. There was nothing, not one pair of feet or anything, but the doorknob just kept rattling. I should point out that the gap between the floor and the door was enough for me to see the outside, or at the very least notice any change in shadow light caused by movement, but there was nothing. The turning of the doorknob then stopped, but I never heard any footsteps or any other noise. Waited a few minutes and opened the door. Everything was quiet. No footprints outside or on the sand surrounding the cottage. We just noped out of there immediately. Story 9. The Door Part 2. So this is very similar to something that happened to me in Indonesia. Only it was a glass sliding doors every side bungalow, outside sunken bath, a couple of meters of clearance around it, and a path. I'd got up really early, 3 a.m., to see sunrise at the volcano some distance away through jungle and road. Had got back early, maybe 10 a.m. I was so tired I lay on the bed in my shorts, curtains open on every side, and just fell asleep. I was woken by this absolutely insane banging on the glass sliding doors. Bear in mind I could see all round through the glass, but for the 4 wooden posts at the corners. But nothing there. I jumped. That's a really mild description for what I did, and stood in the middle of the single space just looking for where it was coming from. And I could see the windows shaking as they banged. It was proper fast, too. Not a regular banging, but bang, 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 just this uninterrupted salvo of something I couldn't see, hitting the window so hard the glass was moving. And then it started going round the cabin, banging as it went. Like I say, I could see it bending the glass as it did, though it was hard to track at first, just because it was so weird and fast. I darted over to the bedside and called reception, shouting for them to come down. This was a threaded pathway away from the main hotel in its old Dutch colonial building, and they came. It stopped after a few minutes. I waited, still standing. They arrived, and when I told them what it was, the porters and butlers, yeah, it was quite a posh hotel thing, just crouched down and put their hands on their heads and began crying. A couple of them hightailed it right off in the car and didn't come back to work. One of them, a lovely guy called Kanang, told me a bunch of stuff about the villagers who had been angry that these cabins had been put up. Apparently only half of them, cabins 1 to 6, had been built, but he always gets calls on the switchboard from cabin 12, which is as yet unconstructed, and when he picks it up, it's just a jumbled hiss and voices. Story 10. The Woods. Years ago, I remember sneaking out of my friend's house at night to really do nothing but walk around the neighborhood and hide from car headlights. We were young and bored. There was a homeless camp that was down in some woods off the railroad tracks not too far from his house. We had seen the trail and knew what was back there. One of the homeless guys that lived there was actually an old friend of my buddy's dad, and he had stopped over a few times, and my friend's dad let him shower there and everything. He could have worked if he wanted, but legit told us he just liked living off the grid. Just wanted to give you some backstory on the reason why we thought it would be cool and safe to go check it out at night. We were a bit nervous at first, thinking, what if we get there and his dad's friend isn't there? So we were sneaking up on it. It was a longer walk than we thought. We got kind of close and saw there was a fire going, lighting up the woods a bit. We start sneaking closer, but the trail seemed to continue straight, while the camp set off the trail to the left. We got IDK maybe 100 feet from the camp, about 30 meters, and we looked down the trail and saw a faint silhouette of what we thought was a person. The silhouette looked like it was coming from deeper in the woods towards the camp. We froze and ducked slightly to the side of the trail. I told my friend that I didn't like it, and we should just sneak the hell out. He said he had the same feeling. As I said, the fire at the camp was just enough to light the area well enough to see. We end up slowly creeping slightly off the trail back to the railroad tracks. We get probably 30, 40 or so feet, 9, 12 meters, and I told him I would rather just hit the trail and just slowly walk back, because the bushes and trees and everything were hard to navigate, and I would rather be able to see something coming so we could book it out. We played football and were both pretty fast. We slide out of the brush and see the silhouette has gotten closer. However, moving further from the fire, the light was dimmer, but we could still make out someone or something was standing there moving closer. My first thought was that maybe they saw us duck into the bushes and were coming to check, but it just felt off. My friend and I looked at each other and both mutually and silently decided to pick up the pace. Almost on qui, we both looked back, and the silhouette was now booking it towards us absolutely silent. No noise, just fast movement. We hightail it as fast as we can. Thankfully, the trail was wide, so we weren't bumping into each other or anything. Neither of us looked back until we hit the railroad tracks, then hit the railroad track bridge and were on the other side. I looked back as I was slowing down, past the bridge, and didn't see anyone. We got back to his house pretty fast, and luckily that was the end of it. Story 11, The Bear Man. The Legend of Bearman. So people think of that one South Park episode with Bearman Pig. No, it's not even close to that. So there was this camp I used to go to during the summer. There was probably around 500 kids there for a week straight. Everyone had cabins they would stay in assigned by gender and age, and had an older person be in charge of one cabin. The older person was around 17, 18, watching 13, 16-year-olds in the cabins. And then the staff were actual adults who had their own cabins, but they would be on night shift duties to walk around and make sure everyone was staying in their cabins. So now that you kind of know the setting, let's get into the legend. As it goes, in the woods, and when all the kids were in the cabins and the lights were out, a bear would come out from the deep woods and wander into the campgrounds. The bear would then stand on its back legs and walk as if it was a human. Then it would choose to go into a cabin, and if you were unlucky, it would go by your bed and watch you sleep. If you made any single move, it would grab you and take you into the woods, never to be seen again. Hearing that scared the crap out of 14-year-old me. It was something the older girl told all of us. A bunch of the other girls were like, "It's not true, it's so we stay quiet and sleep." But other kids from cabins heard of it too. I never stopped thinking about it, and I would always try to stay as still as possible when I slept. Flash forward a few years later, I ran into one of the staff that used to work at the camp, and I told them about how scared I was about bearmen, but it was a good trick to use to get kids to stay quiet. Well, turns out, it's actually based off a true story. I guess back in the 80s, a man dressed in a bear costume, which was some sort of mascot for the camp at the time, and take girls out of their cabin. So, as you could imagine, to my horror, I was completely bewildered that Bearman actually existed at some point in time. Story 12. Not the police. Something weird happened to me, more scary in a what could have been kind of way, so not on the same scale as the poor people in the comments. I was 17 years old, male, and walking home from a night out quite drunk and stoned about 2 a.m. I'm in a lonely part of my walk, no people, few cars, just a road and some large shops, a B&Q and a carpet showroom, out-of-town shopping complexes that have since become ubiquitous in the UK. Anyway, in a lay-by about 15 feet away is a silver car pulled up lights on. as I stumble past two men step out and call me over. Something about the situation immediately sobers me up. I keep walking, and one of them shouts, "It's fine, we are the police. We will drive you home." I stop for a moment and reply with some smart-ass comment along the lines of how police would never do this, and that they were dodgy. Calling them dodgy always sticks in my mind. He insists I'm too drunk and it's not safe for a young man like me and I should let them take me home. I say no, and he then tells me to come over here and listen to the police radio in the car to prove they are real police. It's weird the guy is almost begging me, desperation in his voice. I repeat a firm, "No, tell them I'm fine," and keep walking. Minute I'm out of sight, I run as fast as I can and don't relax until the 30 minutes later I'm home. I can only assume they didn't manhandle me into the car because there was the very occasional taxi driving past. I'm 45 now, and occasionally think about how that could have ended for me. None of the scenarios seem good. Sadly, stories like this are probably more routine for women, but at the time, it really shook me up. Story 13, Trust Your Instincts. This story kind of creeps me out even to this day, but I have a pretty good one. I lived in Mesa, Arizona when I was 10 years old. We lived in a rough area, but I was just a kid, completely ignorant to the dangers of the world. I was walking back home from my friend's house, and my mother wanted me home by 9, and I'd always start walking back at around 8:40 to make sure I wasn't late, and it's only like a couple blocks from my house, so it wasn't a super long distance. It was around the time of year when the sun would set at 5:30 and be dark, well before 7 p.m. So it was very much nighttime. As I'm walking, I hear a woman calling my name. I turn to look and see it was one of my mom's friends, but she didn't know her too well. However, I just saw that she was familiar and won't say a name, but I turned around and said hello and smiled. She walked up to me and told me my mom had called her and asked her to come get me and ride me back because something happened at my house. She said it was an emergency and that I needed to go with her and her husband, whom my family was also familiar with. I was only about 5 minutes from my house, but I was told it was an emergency and I agreed to go with her. As I'm walking, I get this weird feeling in my gut and this shaking in my legs that I now today realize was my instincts being on high alert. I stopped for a minute and asked if we could call my mom, and she said my mother was in the hospital right now and that I need to hurry. Right as we were opening the door to the car, I hear my mother shout my name as loud as she can, and I turned on a dime and quickly walked towards my mom. My mom asked what's going on, and the woman replies and says that she was just giving me a ride home because she saw me. It was not the story she gave me, so I told my mother what she told me and asked what was going on. My mom just looked at me, and she could always tell when I'm lying versus when I'm telling the truth. The woman then goes to interrupt me, likely to lie, and my mom cuts her off and just stared back at her with the most shocked look ever, and these words still send shivers down my spine. She says in the most shocked voice ever, "You were trying to take my son," and the husband looks out the window hurrying his wife in the car, and as I looked back towards him, I can see a syringe on the dashboard leaning against the windshield that he grabs, right as I see it. She gets in the car, because at that point my mom was ready to kill her, and reached into her purse because she keeps a pocket knife. But they drove away, and right after they did, my mom looked at me and just burst into tears saying, "I'm almost lost you." My mom knew full well what was happening, and I was still too shaken to even say anything, and just hugged her back and we went home. I was still in denial, and to cope, I would convince myself that maybe I wasn't in any danger. My family obviously never kept in contact with any of them, but my stepdad at the time submitted a tip to the police of the incident. When they caught up with him about 3 months later, we had found out that he was arrested for having CP on his computer and found restraints in his closet, as well as some containers of propofol. They found pictures of me from my mom's Facebook downloaded on his computer as well, leading them to believe that I was actually being watched for a good bit. I never liked talking about it because, to this day, if I hadn't stopped for those 10 seconds to ask the woman to call my mom, I don't know where I'd be, or if I'd even be alive right now making this comment. And while it may seem like something that would have easily been forgotten, it was never the case for me. I haven't even told my closest friends this story, but I might sometime soon. I asked my mom what happened that night, why she came looking for me. She described the same feeling I remembered feeling moments before I was almost abducted. Just a lot sooner than I did, and just had the instinct that I was in danger. I'm not usually a lucky person, It seems the odds are always against me, but I always remember how lucky I was that night, that my mom decided to listen to her instincts when I didn't. I've never ignored my instincts since, and every night after that when I finally did decide to leave my house, my mom would walk with me all the way up until I turned 13 to come back to live with my dad. And that to date is the scariest thing I think I've ever experienced. It's some shit you only hear of on the news, and nobody ever assumed it will happen to them. But my life was a mere 20 seconds from being completely different. Welcome to Creepy Canvas, the channel where chilling tales come to life. I'm your guide through the shadows, and tonight we dive into the darkest corners of the internet to unearth true scary stories that will send shivers down your spine. From haunted forums to mysterious encounters, our canvas is painted with the stuff nightmares are made of. So, grab your courage and join us on this journey into the unknown. Don't forget to subscribe, because here on Creepy Canvas, every story leaves its mark. Now brace yourself for the true scares that await. Story 1. We got lost in a forest. The following is a story that took place quite a few years back now. However, it still baffles me completely, and I'd like to share it here. I'm a teenager, and I've been in scouting Boy Scouts for nearly all my life, and I really enjoy exploring with my friends and being trusted more, as I'm older now. A few years ago, me and two girls named Amy and Harriet were asked to head into the woods surrounding our campsite to find a long, straight stick suitable for carving into a point. Bear in mind that I was a lot younger back then. Harriet was older, and Amy only 1 year older than myself. We had been walking in deliberately the same direction as to not get lost, and memorizing the surroundings as we went, in order to find our way back easily. About 15 minutes in, we couldn't find anything to take back, so we turned around to return to the campsite. That's the initial panic set it. The trees had almost unnaturally knitted themselves together in such a way that it seemed our path was non-existent in the first place, like it had just vanished. We looked around 360 degrees, and now everything looked exactly the same. Trees we could have sworn were different from one another appeared as all copies of the same tree. We kept walking in what we thought to be the correct direction, whilst shouting out for help, and eventually came to a concrete path, almost like a road, but very thin, separating the forest, splitting it into two. We didn't follow the road as it went in the wrong direction to our campsite. On the other side of the path was more forest. However, nearby was an abandoned shack, likely used for storage or whatever else. We had no idea anything like this was out here in these woods, so we just kept walking. We eventually came to a road we didn't recognize. A woman wearing a pink and purple regatta outdoors coat walked past, and we frantically asked her for the direction of our campsite, as by now, according to our watches and Harriet's phone, we'd been walking for an hour and a half. She said she'd never seen us before, but she said there's another campsite in that direction. We followed her advice and eventually came back to our campsite. We frantically apologized for being so long and that we couldn't find anything. The leader, Ian, could see all three of us were shaken up, and he stated confused that we'd only been gone 25 minutes and that our free time was still going on. To this day, this baffles all three of us, as our free time was 40 minutes long, and our watches and phones had said we'd been gone for hours. The forest we were lost in felt crushing and claustrophobic, like we'd entered an area that the concept of time didn't apply to. I believe in the paranormal, however, this was so unlike anything I've heard or experienced before. It literally was like we'd been in a time vortex or something, and that hours in the forest were only minutes in the rest of the world. The feeling was very strange, and it stuck with me for the rest of the camp. Story 2. I went to a serial killer's lair. Hello, friends. Here is a story I have never told anyone, partly because elements of the story are just not appropriate in most social situations. As a result, I've locked this away in my memory, and I rarely think about it. Fair warning, this story does involve some sketchy sexual situations, but does not describe any actual sexual acts. And as another disclaimer, I am completely aware that this story involves me being very stupid and careless. I'm not going to inject these acknowledgments into the story, but rest assured that in hindsight, I am aware of the foolishness that took place. and I don't need to be chided on that topic. Now, where to begin? The year was approximately 1998, 1999. I was a young gay man in my early 20s, living in a medium-sized city in the Midwestern U.S. This was sort of an in-between transitional time for gay people, where in most populous areas we had enough respect to live openly, but there were still plenty of people who did not like us. It was well before the invention of smartphones, and the internet was still in the early stages of mass adoption. There were large communities online, but it was not yet at the point where most Americans were online. Online socialization consisted of chat rooms, hosted by various services like AOL, Yahoo, or IRC servers, and message boards were still in use by large numbers of people. For gay men at that time, it was nothing short of revolutionary. Prior to the internet and to the broader cultural changes, gay men had been stuck looking for fun in secretive and/or shady places due to the inability to freely express ourselves. In the 90s, it was still somewhat risky, but the internet offered a way to talk freely and relatively anonymously, without the risk of being outed or worse. For this reason, it really took off in the gay communities, and gay men were a very large part of the user bases for these social platforms. It was suddenly very easy and relatively safe to find dates, friends, or just sex, and it quickly became the norm for a lot of gay men. On the other hand, being such a new communication tool for most people, we were sometimes blind to the risks. Being an attractive young man in my prime, I made liberal use of online communities to find dates. That is to say, I had plenty of hookups. My city had a decent number of chat rooms and personals message boards, and I had mostly great experiences. I met the typical assortment of good guys, closet cases, and weirdos that you'd expect. I wasn't an absolute hoe by most standards, but suffice to say that a cute gay at that time could generally have a lot more dates than your typical straight person, lol. At some point during this time, I'd had some brief chat on a message board with a guy from my city. I forget his screen name, it's been over 20 years, so let's call him Slim Guy 65. This back and forth had happened on a general thread in the gay section, not in private messages, so it was visible to anyone who chose to read that thread. Nothing had come of it, but about a week later, I received an email from an unrecognized address. The email basically said, "Hey, I'm not gay and I don't agree with the gay lifestyle. I'm here because my friend met this Slim Guy 65 person from this message board, and the guy really hurt him. I don't want this to happen to anyone else. My friend tried to tell the police, but they wouldn't do anything. I see you were talking to Slim Guy 65, so just be careful and stay away from him." Okay, that's strange. What does this person mean by really hurt him? Was his heart broken? Did he get beaten up or verbally abused or what? I responded to the email asking for clarification on what exactly happened. I never received a response. I was slightly weirded out by it, but on the other hand, it's an anonymous email from someone who doesn't respond and is vague about their warning. This could be anything. It could be some disgruntled ex trying to mess with the guy. It could be a real warning about someone gay bashing. It could be someone trolling who doesn't have anything to do with anyone. I kept it in the back of my mind, but pretty much shrugged it off. Several weeks later, I had a weekday off work and decided to take to the internet to fish for some deep as was my custom. Lo and behold, I had an email response to a personal ad. It was Slim Guy 65. He was offering to meet at his place to hang out and just have a good time. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I won't go into details, and as I recall, there weren't really many details discussed, other than the small talk and intros we'd done previously. Nothing about this guy was really sounding interesting to me, but I had no other offers on this day, so I decided why not. I'll go see what this dude is about. As I typed my reply, I suddenly remembered the strange email I'd received warning about this person. I went back and reread it. Still vague, still presenting more questions, and no answers. Should I take this anonymous warning at face value and just ignore SG65? I decided to go check him out anyway. His address was on a rather busy street in the middle of a dense residential area, not some shack out in the woods, and I can handle myself. If he's weird, I can just fuck out of there. Before long, I arrived at the house at the agreed time. It was a duplex-style house with one apartment on the ground floor and one on the second floor. part of a row of several identical duplexes. It was the middle of the afternoon. There was plenty of traffic on the street and the occasional person out on their porch or in their backyard. I pulled up the driveway to the parking area behind the house, got out, and knocked on the door. The guy that answered was a pretty normal, kind of mousy-looking man, probably in his 40s. Slight slim build, soft-spoken, looked like any guy working in an office cubicle somewhere. Not really my type, but honestly, my curiosity was piqued, and I had nothing better to do. So I stepped inside to take a look around and gauge the situation, with the warning email fresh in my mind. I stepped into the back door, into the kitchen. It was very clean, and there was nothing out on the counters, and no table and chairs or anything. That is to say, it did not look like someone was living there. It had been kept up and cleaned, but looked empty. Looking out into the apartment, I could see that it was not set up as a living space. A large window with sliding glass was between the kitchen and living room, and I could see what looked like a large table out in the living room area. SG65 said something like, "This isn't where I live. A friend of mine used to run a doctor's office here. I maintain the building for him. It's private, though. We have the place to ourselves." Weird. Okay. He shut the back door and locked it. With a keyed deadbolt, the kind that you need a key to open, even from the inside, and put his keys back in his pocket, saying, "So, what do you want to do?" At this point, my danger sense spiked. This is not a normal home, and why is he locking the door like that? It's not necessarily suspect. A lot of people have that sort of lock on their door, and the door has a window, so it even makes sense. Still, something is not right here, I can tell, and now I'm locked in. I asked him why he was locking the door like that, which immediately flustered him. He was looking rather nervous, and his voice was a little wavery and halting, not quite stuttering, but almost. He said, well, we don't want someone to come in and interrupt us, right?" Flashing a weak, unconvincing smile. His demeanor and body language were all I needed to confirm that this guy was up to no good, or at least there was something he was hiding. However, I could tell that I was intimidating him. I was not a particularly muscular kid, but I have a larger frame. Like, even when I'm at my very thinnest, I will still wear size L tops and 36 waist pants, so I look big, which people tend to interpret as me being stronger than I really am. Also, I'm not a tough guy at all, but I have a resting facial expression that makes me look like a badass thug. People who don't know me often assume that I'm rough or something. I sometimes use this to my advantage while I can, because before long a new acquaintance will eventually figure out that I'm a total wimpy and lol. But this was definitely an occasion to play up the tough guy appearance, and I did exactly that. I put on my best steely face and told him to unlock the door, and that I don't want to be locked in here. He looked for a moment like he was going to pee his pants, then he said, "Okay, all right, I'll unlock this." He unlocked the deadbolt, "And I'll just lock the knob here." And he turned the little dial that locks the doorknob. That was fine with me. I continued to stare at him until he said, "I'll leave the keys on the counter right here." And he set his keys down near the sink. I was relatively satisfied with that answer. At this point, though, my adrenaline was flowing. I was almost in full fight or flight mode, but I was kind of stuck in place. The guy was between me and the door. I was freaked out, but this little weasel did not appear to pose any immediate physical threat to me. I could tell that his pant pockets were empty, and that I was intimidating the living hell out of him. I didn't know yet exactly what to do. Now keep in mind that despite my wordy descriptions, this all happened very quickly, without any really long pauses. It had only been maybe 1 to 2 minutes since I had stepped in the door. This all happened at the pace of a conversation. The guy was obviously nervous and trying not to appear so. He said, "Well, let's go in," and walked a wide path around me through the kitchen into what would normally be the living room, and toward the hall to the right from there. I was familiar with this floor layout. It is very common in this area. The hallway would lead to 2 small bedrooms with a bathroom in between them. I hesitated, thinking I should just walk out that back door and take off. But really, now I was super curious. I knew there's no way in hell I'm doing anything with this guy, but I kind of want to see what's going on in here. Also, I'm confident that he can't take me if it comes to a fight, so I slowly headed toward the living room. It felt like I was walking in slow motion. From the kitchen entrance, I could see a large rectangular stainless steel table taking up a lot of the living room. I remember thinking, this looks like a surgical table. It looked like it could rise and tilt, and it had a recessed channel running all the way around the edge. In hindsight, I now know what that was. It was 100% a mortician's table. Dude had a mortician's table in there. But at that time, I thought it looked like a medical table of some sort. There was some other office-type cabinets and stuff around, I think. But now, all I really remember is the table in that room. The large front window looking out onto the street was covered by vertical blinds that were closed. SG-65 said something like, "This used to be a doctor's office, like I said. Come on back here." The hallway revealed the room setup that I expected. The first bedroom door was closed. The second door was open to a small, very clean bathroom. At the end of the hall was the other bedroom, which looked like, if the doctor's office story was true, had at one time been converted to an exam room. He said, "We can go in that room if you want. Go ahead. Take a look." And he stayed by the other closed bedroom door. The back bedroom door was open, and I could see that the walls were covered in a honey-colored wood paneling, the type you might see in a den or office that hasn't been updated since the early 1970s. I slowly took a few steps down to that door, trying to be very aware of what Mr. Creepy was doing behind me. He didn't move. When I got up to that room, the first thing I noticed was the door had a keyed deadbolt lock, like the back door. This room locked from the outside. I wondered if there was a lever on the inside, but I pretty much knew the answer to that question without needing to check. I also saw a chair, a non-swiveling plastic desk chair with thin metal legs, sitting near the center of the room. The room had old, dark carpet and those wood-paneled walls. I noticed that the walls were completely paneled with no windows, and I know that room had at least one window, probably two, so whoever did that paneling went over the windows. There was also a phone in there, plugged in, and sitting on the floor. It was an old office phone, probably from around the 80s or early 90s, dingy beige plastic with several buttons to manage different phone lines. Just sitting on the carpet near the wall, with the chair at a slight distance facing the phone. There was nothing else in that room. I was standing at the threshold of that room, with one foot slightly in, absolutely not going past that door. I looked back at Dude. He was still standing by that other door, just nervously smiling at me, trying hard to look casual, but obviously very nervous or something. He said something like, "Well, what do you want to do?" Instead of answering, I felt around the backside of the deadbolt lock. Sure enough, nothing there but the smooth wood of the door. It also dawned on me that I did not see a light switch anywhere for the ceiling lamp. Where was the switch? Who knows? It should have been just inside the door, of course, but that original switch was covered up by the paneling. He mumbled something about not having the key to that lock. Don't worry about it. I turned back to face the guy and just said, "What is it that you want to do here?" My skin had gone ice cold as I realized that I was way, way, way too far into this apartment. I was running through my options in my head. What is this guy going to do? He doesn't appear to have any weapon or anything in reach, but who the fuck knows what goes on in this place? "What are you trying to do?" He was almost totally derailed by that. He stammered out, "Some hot, man-to-man fun?" With the weakest smile I've ever seen, looking like he was just a hair's breadth away from panicking. That sounds comical. But really, that sentence was probably the most chilling part of the entire experience for me. It was the way he said it, like he had to come up with something on the fly, something that would sound plausible, and he failed. Who says that in real life? "Hey, do you want to have some hot man-to-man fun?" Nobody. It's something you'd see on an advertisement for a cheesy porn site or something. Some hot man-to-man fun. Smile. Quivering lips. That was it. I said, "Nope, I want to go. I'm leaving." He said, okay." I quickly walked past him as he flattened himself against the wall to avoid me, and I noped right out through the living room dissection area and through the kitchen to the back door, which was thankfully still not dead-bolted. The keys were still on the counter. I let myself out of the door and didn't bother closing that, as I saw him slowly coming to the door behind me. I deliberately walked, not ran, to my car. Looking back at the building, I could see that indeed there was a window facing the backyard area from that paneled room, but of course it was covered up from the inside. Dude was shutting and locking the back door, and I left, heart pounding, skin icy cold, thinking, holy fuck, what was that? So, was this guy some kind of killer? Or was he just an awkward closeted gay guy, with access to a sterile-looking apartment with an autopsy mortuary table, and a windowless room that locks from the outside, with a chair and a phone, and no light switch? It's clear to me that the poor soul who walks into that room gets locked in. He probably shuts off the light from somewhere and calls the phone. Other than that, it's anyone's guess what happens. I assume the friend of the judgmental person who emailed me must have been some kid that got locked in for whatever game ensues. Driving home at first, I thought, of course, I have to call the police and tell them what's in that place. But, thinking it through, I realized I didn't really have any crime to tell them about. I went to meet a man for casual sex. And what? He has a room with a chair in it? He has, as I thought at the time, an exam table? The police aren't going to do anything with that story. The guy didn't touch me or do anything to me, and I left. I considered calling an anonymous tip line, but again, what exactly would I report? There was no actionable crime. Also, keep in mind that at that time, while the local police in this city were pretty decent, they weren't especially interested in getting involved with helping the gays. They'd prosecute actual crimes if it was cut and dry, but I'd heard plenty of accounts of them not choosing to follow up on cases where there was not an easy arrest to be made. I decided not to report anything because nothing would come of it except drawing unwanted attention to myself. Even in retrospect, I think that was probably the most rational choice to make. If this happened today in 2020, the law enforcement would probably be a lot more interested in it. But back then, not so much. So live and learn. I still drove past that house once in a while in the normal course of life for several years, and I'd pay attention to how it looked. The vertical blinds were closed for maybe 5 or 6 years, wherever I went past. Then eventually the blinds were down and there were decorative curtains in the window, so I assumed the place was eventually sold to someone who actually lived in it. Around 2002, maybe 2003, there was a murder of a young man on the news. He'd been found in the next state, which borders on my city, so it's not very far away. I recognized the guy from the gay community, but didn't know him personally. A friend mentioned to me something about the local serial killer. I said, "What?" He explained that a few young men had gone missing over the past year, each after being at one specific dive bar, and each being found several miles to the north past the state line and out in the country. The case on the news matched up with that M.O. My friend told me the young guy had been at that bar and left with someone the night that he disappeared. The news report didn't mention anything about a gay bar or similar recent cases, of course. I had to wonder if my acquaintance from the internet had anything to do with it. The location of the murders apparently was nowhere near that duplex, at least according to the story I was told. I never heard of a resolution to that murder on the news, or any official mention of a suspected serial killer, other than some gossip. So, that happened. Story 3. The Night Shift. This is probably the creepiest, most unexplainable thing that has ever happened to me. I used to work overnight as a security guard at the local port. Usually none of the port workers would stay overnight, except for the safety official. I wouldn't be on the shift alone since the site has a radius of nearly 2 miles. Overnight, usually there would be 3 guards, including me. Since the area was fairly big, there were different posts, but front gate was the main entrance area where all of the guards would be stationed overnight since there was no need to put them in other posts due to the fact that there was no activity in the site at this time. The veteran guards that have been there for years would often say that the site was haunted. given the fact that there have been accidents and deaths that occurred in the area a long time ago. I was aware that people died there due to freak accidents, and I do believe in angels and demons since I'm actually a religious person, but I always thought that the superiors were just messing with the new guys. I would work 5 to 6 nights out of the week, and for the first few weeks I never really saw or heard anything out of the ordinary, except for maybe a few questionable creaks, and would see a few misplaced objects while doing my patrol rounds. But nothing too crazy. Just to describe the setting to you, this is a fairly big site, and on occasions when there were big projects being constructed at the port, the workers would sometimes stay overnight. Due to the fact that there were times where port workers were required to stay at the port for a few days, there's a gym in the site for their convenience. This gym is fairly old. In the gym there's a sauna, weights, and even a racquetball court. If you don't know what a racquetball court is, it's similar to an indoor tennis court with thin plastered walls and thick glass doors. Usually on our patrol rounds, me and one of the other guards, Mike, would stop by the gym and play a few rounds of racquetball before returning back to the front gate. On one of those nights, me and Mike decided to hit a full workout instead of playing racquetball in the cage. This is around 2:30 a.m., and the entire building is so quiet that you can hear the electricity running through the lights. The air conditioner is off, and so is everything else. The only thing that's running are the lights. 15 to 20 minutes into the workout, we hear a loud thump. We crossed it off as nothing and continued working out. Then, after a few more minutes, we heard the loud thump once more. At first we thought it was our lieutenant, which could have been walking around, but then we radioed him and he gave us his location, which was front gate. We tried thinking logically on what could be making those thumps on the wall. They were coming from the court on the other side. We thought it was the air conditioner, but then we remembered that it was off, and even when it's switched on during the day, there's no reports of thumps coming from the air conditioner. After a few more minutes, the thumps started occurring one right after another. We were very creeped out at this point, but what we were about to witness still scares the absolute shit out of me to this day. We started to approach the other side of the gym to where the glass door was. We turned on the flashlight and aimed it towards the clear glass door, and I got chills all over my body, and I started tearing so much out of fear that I was about to cry. We saw one of the balls rolling slowly by itself inside the court, but there was no one in there. So that means the loud thumps were the balls mysteriously being tossed against the wall, as if something was playing inside the cage. We were both so confused and frightened to how this was really happening. We couldn't make sense of any of it. We were scared shitless, and we started yelling and running away because we knew that there was probably something evil toying with us right there. As we sprinted full speed back to the front gate, the lieutenant saw us and asked why we were tearing and running in a ridiculous manner. We told him what we witnessed, and his facial expression scared us even more. He then said, "That's why there's always guards that quit often. There's something evil in the area, and it's not the first time that something that bad has happened here." He then showed us security footage of dark figures and shadows literally passing through the office areas and lights mysteriously switching on and off. To this day, I still get chills recounting my experience with my friends and family, and I'm even getting chills right now as I'm typing this. I had never had a real encounter with the supernatural until that night. Many say that it was a demonic presence messing around. Others say it was a ghost of a dead person who died in the area. I don't know what it was, but I didn't last long in the job after that. Story 4. Not my mother. So this story happened about 11 years ago. I was a senior in high school at the time, but it is the single most mind-boggling thing that I have ever experienced. It's also important to note that it happened in mid-December. I am from Iowa, and the winters here get cold at night. Like if you get stuck outside, you will die kind of cold. That plus the snowfall makes everything dead silent. You can hear anything and everything inside the house and even immediately outside of it. Well, me and my best friend were hanging out in my family's walkout basement, just having a boring winter night playing video games. We were also the only ones home. The reason it was just us is because my mother went from work straight to a bar to grab a few drinks with coworkers, so me and my friend thought it would be a good idea to break into the family wine and live a little. As we were sitting there opening up the first bottle, I hear the door to the garage open and slam shut. I immediately go, "Oh shit," and start looking for places to hide the bottle. My friend then says, "I thought you said your mom was supposed to be out all night." "She was," I replied. I then heard a few heavy stomps and hear my mother yell out, "Honey, anyone home?" I yell back up the stairs, "Yup, just hanging out in the basement." I hear a few more steps move from the garage door toward the stairs, and she yells out again, "Can you come help me with something? I need you up here." I reply back while frantically trying to find a good place to hide the wine bottle, "Yup, give me just a minute." Then there was silence for about 20 seconds. "Anyone down there with you?" She yelled back in a more concerned, serious tone, in a voice that was slightly off of my mother's. This was the first thing that told me something wasn't right. Our family never cared if anyone was over, as our house was a very open house to all family and friends. And the voice, it was just wrong, like it sounded like my mother's, but it was missing something that I couldn't out my finger on. Weirded out, I reply back, "Just Colton." After I yelled that back to her, I found a good place to hide the bottle and began walking up the steps to the next level. Now, as I was walking up the steps, I couldn't help but feel the overbearing silence of the house and the slight electric twinge that something isn't right. When I got to the top of the steps, I look over to where the door to garage is and also the kitchen right next to it, and it's black, pitch black, all if the lights were off, and there was no moonlight shining through any windows. I walked over to the kitchen yelling out, "Mom, where are you?" There was no reply, just silence and darkness. I feel the electric twinge turn into full needles, and my adrenaline kicking in full force. I have to get out of here as fast as possible. My mother was not home. I run back down the stairs, grabbing my coat along the way. "What's wrong?" Colton says. "My mom's not home." I reply as fast as I can, looking for my truck keys. "What do you mean? You were just talking with her?" I could see the confusion in his face. "There's no one home. We need to leave now." I took a few steps towards the back door that opens up to the yard, and then I see my dog shaking on the couch and my cat growling behind it. I couldn't leave them. I just knew that if we left, something would happen. "Are we leaving?" Colton said, still confused as all hell. "No, I can't leave them here alone. Something is really off. I'm going to call my mom and figure this out." I pull out my phone and call my mom. She picks up immediately. "Hello? What's going on?" She answers, "Mom, were you just home? I heard you yelling for me from the second level, and when I went up, you weren't there," I said frantically, hoping that she was playing a joke. "No, I'm just leaving the bar. I wasn't feeling very well. Are you okay?" "What do you mean you heard me?" I fill her in on the whole story, and she rushes home. Colton and I stayed in the basement with the animals until she got home. But before she did, you could hear something upstairs, not walking or sitting on things, but a pressure in the air, like a black hole was slowly moving from one room to the next. And the word that I would instinctively describe it as is hungry. When she got home, you could feel the thing leave just as quick as it came, like an overbearing predatory presence had just flown away. We still have never figured out what the hell was going on, and this is just one story of many unexplainable things that have happened to us. But this is the easiest to write down, and one that I was happy to have a witness. My mother has passed away now, and I have moved away to Arizona, but whenever I go back to Iowa and I see Colton, he still gets creeped out by what had happened. I will never truly know what happened, but I know that whatever it was that had my mother's voice, it was evil, and it was hungry.
Story 5. Help me, I'm lost.
I was living in a rural area in Oklahoma with my mother at a small lake house, and I'm probably 10-11 at this time. One night I'm sleeping in my room when I randomly and abruptly wake up for no reason. This was not normal for me, and I felt very uneasy. The only sound I could hear was my mother snoring in the next room on the couch. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep, but my need to use the bathroom was growing more urgent, so I grudgingly forced myself to head that way. The bathroom is on the other side of the house, around a corner and past the kitchen, and finally down a long hallway on the right. So after I made the trip and finished my business, I flipped off the light switch and started heading back to bed. That's when I heard the distinct click of the light switch, and I saw the glow of the bathroom light in the hallway. Terrified, I slowly turned around just to witness the light in the bathroom start clicking on and off. Click, 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 click. Finally, it shut completely off. In the dark of the hallway, my eyes began to make out a white shape near the end of the hall. It was around my size and crouched to the floor. At this point, I'm frozen to the spot as my mind begins realizing that no one else is home except for my mom and myself. Then the white shape began whispering in a quiet man's voice, "Help me, I'm lost." I remember wanting to scream for my mom, but I couldn't, and instead I barely said, "No," before this thing starts running at me on what sounded like all fours. I quickly ran through the kitchen and around the corner, before running to my sleeping mother, shaking her awake. I remember saying, "It's coming, it's coming," and my mother's eyes going from dazed to alert in an instant. She asked me what was going on, and I saw her eyes look over my shoulder before she screamed. Remembering her scream still makes my blood run cold. Never had I heard pure terror like that in my life, even to this day. She grabs me by the arms and pulls me into my room and slams the door. She holds me in her arms with her back pressed against the door as we listen. It sounded like this thing was running around in circles in the kitchen. We could hear hands and feet slapping against the tile. The kitchen had a sliding glass door to the outside, which sounded like it was thrown open then slammed. We sat there horrified until daybreak. I was sent to my grandmother's in the next town for a while after that, and never set foot in that house again. Years later, my mother said she went walking around the property after the incident and came across a small burial site with 3 headstones that each belonged to children from the early 1900s. It freaks me out because what I heard that night was a man's voice, but it was so unnatural. My mom still will not tell me what she saw behind me and what it was that made her scream. She tells me she's afraid it will know we're talking about it and it will come back. This is the first of many weird things that have happened in my life. Thank you, brave souls, for joining us on another spine-chilling adventure here at Creepy Canvas. If you enjoyed these tales from the shadows, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on our next encounter with the unknown. Remember, the canvas is vast and the stories are endless. Share your thoughts and your own eerie experiences in the comments below. And until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and most importantly, stay creepy. Good night, and sweet nightmares.